G'day legends, in this video we are going to be talking about ESPN and the UFC pretty much admitting that they are running cover for Alex Pereira. Now, I will play the clip later in this video, I absolutely promise, but I just wanted to frame this properly first before we get into it, okay? So, obviously, the UFC and ESPN are not people. They are a company. And a company is a collective of people who are trying to sell you something. The UFC is a company selling sports entertainment, and ESPN is a company that is packaging that and distributing it for them. UFC, ESPN is selling you stories that play out in fights. And one of the biggest stories that they try and sell you is championship fights. That is, who is the best fighter in the world, and they want you to pay $90 a month to see that drama play out on our TV screens. It's a pretty simple premise. They have been doing it for years. Now, one of those people that package that story on behalf of UFC ESPN is Daniel Cormier, and he is one of the most prominent, if not one of the main voices of the UFC ESPN's biggest product, the pay-per-view. So Daniel Cormier might be as close to a company mouthpiece as we will ever get. Not only, right, is Daniel Cormier a voice of the UFC pay-per-view, but he is also on an ESPN show that is called ESPN MMA. Dana is very clearly one of the biggest voices that we hear from on behalf of the UFC, but Dana is essentially just the UFC's mouthpiece, whereas Daniel Cormier works for UFC and for ESPN. He might be one of the biggest mouthpieces that company has for selling us a story. DC is so ingrained in the company, it was once rumored that he was going to be the one taking over for Dana White. That is why when DC says something, you know, A, it's pretty informed, and B, it's coming pretty closely from the top of the company. No one has that much vocal power on behalf of both companies at the exact same time as DC does. Well, Daniel Cormier, the absolute genius, just laid out why Alex Pereira isn't fighting Magomed Ankalaev. And he said, because it's too dangerous. And you want to do a fight like that when you have a star as a last resort. I will let you guys now hear it for yourselves.
Because what the UFC is kind of saying here is, we've got this star. And we know that this guy here could be a real potential issue for that star. They will fight eventually. But they will fight when we have no other option. I don't think you run the risk yet. It is a very, very difficult matchup, possibly the hardest matchup for him in the entire light heavyweight division. You get him in there with someone else right now that's a striker, because all these strikers he's just knocking out left and right. And every time he does that, Chael, his star just shines brighter. So
now, I will admit, that's Daniel Cormier saying it as a personal view. But the reason why I carefully explained what a company is at the start of this video, and that a company isn't one man, it's a collective of men, and that DC is a prominent voice in that collective of men, and he might be one of the most prominent voices that we, the audience, have. Hearing DC say, I personally believe in protecting Alex Pereira, is as good as hearing the UFC ESPN say, we're protecting Alex Pereira. Who else is going to say that? This just adds to all the evidence that in 2024, it has become the ultimate fighting circus. The ultimate fighting circus narrative. It is no longer the best fight the best. It has not been that way since, I don't know, since they merged with the WWE and became the TKO group. We are very, very aware that the UFC protects the stars, but they always seem to do it in a subtle way. That's why Israel Adesanya is getting another undeserved title shot. That's why Colby Covington got one. That's why Stipe Miocic is getting an undeserved title shot. That is why O'Malley got to sit out for a year while the champion had to have a 6-week turnaround. The UFC, ever since partnering with the WWE, has turned narrative-based matchmaking all the way up to number 11. Now, I'll admit, it was always there in the past. It was clearly always there in the past. We know that Chael Sonnen walking into a title shot against John Jones was because of narrative-based matchmaking. But since TKO started, when you really think about it, Leon versus Bilal Muhammad, DDP versus Sean Strickland, might be the only two real title fights that we have seen this year, last year. They might be the only two legitimate title fights that we have actually seen. I know you could be saying like Ilia Topuria versus Alexander Volkanovski, but even Ilia Topuria got sort of shuffled past Max Holloway. Remember, the Korean Zombie was going to retire and they gave him Max Holloway as a retirement fight to keep Max Holloway busy to try and get a #1 contender to go in there against Alexander Volkanovski. Ever since we have become the TKO group, it has been narrative-based matchmaking, and the championship fights have not been the legitimate #1 contender fighting for a title, or the legitimate #1 contender has sort of been stepped aside of other contenders to get him to the title shot. And this right here of DC saying on ESPN, not even on his own personal YouTube channel, this was on ESPN MMA's YouTube channel, which gets put onto ESPN. This is one of the biggest narratives that they have, one of the biggest mouthpieces that they have. And it is Daniel Cormier saying, we are protecting Alex Pereira because Magomed Ankalaev might be too much of a test for him right now. And you only want to do that as an absolute last resort when you have a superstar. He just laid out what the UFC has been doing for the last 2 years right there for all to see. And luckily enough for ESPN MMA, it was lost in 42 minutes of DC and Chael Sonnen talking about their ex-girlfriends back in high school. So naturally the audience would zone out and not quite pick up on it. But there was a man out there listening to that show, making the 1 millionth blank wall smooth for the 1 millionth time, drywalling alone, had nothing better to do than to listen to these two yap about MMA and picked up exactly what DC was saying. And now I will signal boost it for you boys. The UFC and ESPN are protecting Alex Pereira because he has become one of their superstars. And they know that Magomed Ankalaev is too dangerous of a fight for Pereira. So they want to squeeze out as much star power as they can before they give him Magomed Ankalaev. They did the same thing with Leon Edwards, Colby Covington. They're doing the same thing with John Jones. They will try and do the same thing with Sean O'Malley. I bet if he gets past Merab, he will get a champ shot. The UFC is the ultimate fighting circus. It is no longer the best fight the best. We have known that for a while, but I think this is just a little bit more evidence to put onto that argument. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, leave a like. Let me know down there, do you think Alex Pereira could beat Magomed Ankalaev if they fought? Do you think he needs protecting? If this is your first time here, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to the channel? Every single subscriber means so much to small creators like myself. I try and make a MMA video every single day. I try and go live a couple of times a week, and I do watch parties, watch-alongs, even for the most boring cards you can imagine. I'm not going to quit on you like Lucas Tracy did. Just kidding, Lucas. Enjoy retirement. Until then, I'll catch you guys all in the next video. See ya.